coffee or a Coke?
I think it came from, Louisiana. Everybody was everybody's cousin down there.
Before that, Louisiana.
When we got there,
This is Cajun country.
yeah, very interesting country too.
Okay, this is November 7th, 1984. I'm Joe Todd, an interview with Mr. Elmore Mount. Sir, where were you born?
Wichita Falls, Texas. 1906.
What month and day?
July the 12th.
Who is your father?
George.
And your mother?
Annette.
What was her maiden name?
McCowan.
McCowan?
McCown.
Were your folks both from Texas?
My father was. My mother came from Tennessee. No, Mississippi. Mississippi.
How long did you live in Wichita Falls?
I went through high school there.
And how come you came to Oklahoma?
Well, I was attended the University of Oklahoma, and then when that was over, I went back home to Wichita Falls and started working for the old Petroleum Oil Company.
What did you study at OU? What did you study at Oklahoma?
Petroleum Engineering.
When did you go there? What years?
24, 25.
And you worked for the Texoma?
Texoma Oil and Gas, which merged with Continental Oil Company.
What year?
31.
31.
I think it's 31. Somewhere along there. It might have been a little earlier than that, but anyway, it's in the late 20s or early 30s. From there, I was sent on a special assignment to the Denver office, which was Continental Oil Company's headquarters. From there, I was given an assignment out of eastern Colorado to run it was a meter that measured, it's a magnetometer. Magnetometer. And I ran that all over eastern Colorado. And one day, the chief geologist called me up and asked me how I was getting along. I said, getting along fine. He said, do you need anything from the office? And I said, no. Well, don't come in. If you need anything, call me at home. Dan Moran and his bunch are leaving Wichita Falls and they're heading for Denver. That was after the merger with Marley. And they were wiping out duplicate departments completely. And it's the only thing he could do. He had 2 men for every job. So I said, don't call me. Just stay out there. If you need the money, come out to my house. So I did. And so when this bus with Dan Moran and all of his officials were in Wichita Falls, I saw my name on the roster. I said, well, where is he? He's in Denver. So we'll get him when we get up there. By the time they got to Denver, they forgot all about me. And so I never missed a day. Shortly after that, they called me and said they needed someone like me to do some surveying for the geophysical department in Ponca City. So there's where I went to Ponca City. First time I was ever here. Now that was in 30, 31. I remember that. Yeah.
What were your duties with the oil company? What did you do?
Well, I did geophysical work for the old Continental Oil Company with the magnetometer.
What's the magnetometer? What does it do?
It measures the magnetic intensity of an area, and it varies from locale to locale, depending upon how close some of the bedrocks are to the surface. See, there's magnetic waves going all around the Earth, and they come over, and they are attracted by this solid stuff material down below us, and these waves will come down. It depends upon how strong that pull is to how close these sub-rocks are to the surface.
Now, is that a way to find oil?
That's one way to find oil, to find the high spots.
You look for bedrock? Is that what you're looking for?
We look, no, we don't look for bedrocks. We look for the result of the bedrocks, which pull these waves down to the earth. And so therefore, if you have a buried mountain underneath you, then it stands to reason that they are good, that these sands, all-bearing sands and shales and rocks would conform to that, so you find your oil up on top in the sand. So you try to find the apex of these buried hills, one system or another, and there are several ways of doing it. The seismograph does the very best job of that.
When you were at Oklahoma at the university, who was head of the department?
I don't know.
Because that was the first school.
Oh, you mean at the head of the geological department?
Yeah, right.
Oh boy, what was his name? I can't recall. He was. The part that I studied there in Oklahoma was just the beginning geology, but it was more in physics. So I can't remember all that.
Wasn't it the first school of petroleum engineering in the country?
I think it was.
Yeah.
But what we learned there would not apply today. We learned about steam, and we learned about drilling, not the rotary type, but the up and down.
The standard rigs?
Standard rigs, and that sort of thing.
Did you work on the old standard rigs?
No, but I had to, at one time, I had to scout them and visit with them and watch them operate and get acquainted with the driller so I could sneak over and look at the logbook and see where he was, which we did.
When did they bring the first rotary rig in this area?
I don't know. My first contact with Rotary Rig was in the early 30s out in Jowell, New Mexico. And I was running the magnetometer out in that part of the country, and there was no other one there close by who could scout these rigs, so they told me to scout them. So I'd scout rigs in the morning and run the magnetometers in the afternoon. Now, the interesting thing about rotary rigs and the difference between a rotary rig and standard tools is the kind of tobacco they chewed, and also the kind of gloves they wore. So you had to know, if you were going to a rotary rig, what kind of tobacco to take to the driller, or what kind of gloves. These are just little odd things that you find out.
That's right.
The hard way.
Now, I talked to one guy, and he was a tool dresser on a standard rig. What does a tool dresser do?
Well, these are great big tools. They're about, according to what size hole they're drilling, but say they're about this big around, and they're shaped like this. So that as that thing turns, this part does the cutting. Well, these things get dull after a while. You tend to start flat, so they're lifted out, laid down on the ground, and heated, just like you would in a blacksmith shop. And there's a guy with a great big 16 or 12-pound sledge, hitting it just like a blacksmith would, hitting a horseshoe, beat it back into shape. And he has a ring there that tells him when he's got it to the right size.
Now, is this from the standard rig, or?
That's a standard rig.
Okay. Now, is it just gravity down in the hole in the standard rig?
Yeah, that's right.
How high do they drop that rig from? How high do they lift it?
Well, I think, depending upon what they're drilling in, but if I recall, it's somewhere around 6-10 feet. Each time they lift it up, bang, bang.
Has that steam operated the lift on that?
Yeah, steam's operated. It's got a great big bull wheel, a great big belt that runs well, now they weren't all steel, but the ones I remember were, from the steam engine up here to where they operated. And one thing nice about the steam operated ones was that the drillers could wash his clothes in the steam. They had a little box there, and he poured steam into it. And it's also a good place to cook your corn that you'd swipe on the way out there from your cornfield. Delicious.
Mm-hmm. How many men work on a standard rig?
Well, I just believe there's just two, the driller and the tool dresser.
That's all?
Oh, I remember.
Yeah. How about a rotary rig? How many?
Well, now that's a completely different story.
It is.
The first ones I saw were only about a foot and a half off the ground. Later, while they jumped way up in the air. But they have a lot more men operating on that, because they have to lift those tools up and use big tongs and wrenches to separate the joints and stack them, and then put them back down the hole.
Of course, I've heard the stories of the gusher coming in. How the gushers coming in?
Yeah.
How dangerous are the gushers?
Well, I have never seen one actually blow the top, blow out. I got to Oklahoma City too late to see that one down there.
Oh, the Mary City?
Mm-hmm. But they usually are very careful about that. I think they learned to control with using the right weight mud, so forth. They could control that. It was just the people who were new at the game, didn't know much about drilling, that ever let one of those things get away from them. And I never did see one. Thank goodness. They could be pretty bad, I imagine, if there's a high pressure gas lifting it up.
Right. How come Texoma Oil merged with Conoco? How come Texoma merged with Conoco?
Well, let me see. How come did they? At that time, Conoco, Continental Oil Company was divided. I don't know exactly how their organization was, but there was a Continental Oil Company of Texas, a Continental Oil Company of here, and a Continental Oil Company there, although they were all under one head in Denver. And I suppose the main reason, I'm sure it was, the main reason was for outlets, filling stations, sale of gasoline and oil in the Wichita Falls area. And Texoma had some. And it was just an expansion of an oil company that told them that this was a good little company to buy. They had they had some good leases, pretty good production, and nothing there but plus.
Was Texoma local around Wichita Falls?
Yes. Yes.
How many employees did it have, Texoma?
Well, let's see. I don't know. They had a refinery. I didn't know too much about. And they had a land department, and they had a geological department, which I was in. And so I really don't know. I couldn't make you a guess.
Okay, and then when did Conoco merge with Marlin?
Let's see, I went to work in 1926. Oh, with Marlin and Conoco? Oh. Gosh, that must have been 31, 32.
Now, you mentioned 1926.
That's when I started working with Texoma.
Okay. And how come Conoco merged with Marlin? You know the reason behind that?
I got some reasons why they shouldn't have, but the same reason applies to Conoco and DuPont, but that's neither here nor there. I suppose it was somewhat the same reason, opportunities. I think Marlin probably didn't have the kind of management that their bosses thought they should have. Somehow or other, they weren't able to control their finances. And Continental, which was, what is that guy's name, financier?
J.P. Morgan.
J.P. Morgan. Was pretty good little company, well managed, well operated. And I expect that's part of the reason.
Why do you think they shouldn't have merged?
Continental and Marlin?
Yeah.
Well, from a personal standpoint, not from an economic standpoint or they're getting a better company, but it did cost a lot of people their jobs. A lot of people. And they put a man in as president who was the only kind of a man who could make this thing work. He was tough, he was ruthless. If he wasn't that way, it wouldn't have worked at all.
Who was that?
Dan Moran. Dan Moran came up from he was from Texaco, Texas company, and he had a lot of experiences down in Mexico. But he did what had to be done, and there wouldn't have been very many people who could have done that.
Now, what did he do?
Well, here you had two land departments, Continental and Marlin. You had two geologic departments. You had two of everything. Well, if you just have one company, you're going to have to do something, and that's what he had to do.
How did they determine who to fire and who to keep?
Well, I don't know. But in addition to people, they also had inventory, high inventory. There's a big warehouse down on the east side of the refinery now. There was just well, I don't know where it was. I don't know where that had been. But anyway, they had lots of equipment that wasn't being used or wasn't making us money. And I think that was another thing that he had to do. But he was a stickler for everything had to be painted, clean. You could walk through that refinery with a pair of white gloves on and never touch dirt.
Yeah. What do you have?
This is the history of the first 100 years out of Conoco, the
Yeah.
first 100 years of Conoco.
I should have read that before it came up.
That's okay.
I got
I guess Moran was the vice president of one, I guess, the Wichita Falls operation. This is the Texas company vice president, so I suppose
Yeah.
he's the vice
I don't know
president.
that it was Wichita Falls,
Okay.
but it was a Texas company.
But I didn't realize this. I guess they'd offered Marlin the opportunity to be, I guess, a chairman of the board or something like that. They didn't completely force him out, did they?
That could have.
Yeah.
That could have. It was probably just a honorary job.
Yeah. What says that? It said, I guess that happened in May of 1928.
28, okay. That was before, yeah, had to be then because that was before I moved to Ponca City.
Did you know Mr. Marlin?
No. I had been up here from Oklahoma. I played on there for a year. I played on their polo team, and that was that's the main thing up here. I made a couple of trips up here, but I don't know whether I ever met him or not.
Did you meet George? Was George on the polo team then?
No, I don't remember him either. We went to Ponca City, we went to El Reno, we went to Tucson, somewhere else.
Now, you say you were on the polo team.
Mm-hmm.
Which polo team?
Oklahoma University.
Oh, okay.
They had what supported it was an artillery unit, and the captain made all the purchases. He'd buy a horse. If he thought it played polo, well, he'd buy it. Full of caissons and the guns. That's where we had privates to take care of the horses.
Who was the polo player that was killed down in Oklahoma? He was on the polo team. Remember who that was? He was killed in a polo accident.
No. I've got an old picture, just a little bit. Frank Church has been trying to get it away from me. He wants to put it down here. Of four, and I can't even remember the guys' names I played with.
Well, now, did Marlin bring polo here and then
Yeah.
the University of Oklahoma picked it up?
Well, I don't know where Oklahoma picked it up.
Okay.
Marlin brought it here.
Brought it here.
Tell me some more about the university. You said that you studied geology.
Yeah. Well, I was in the School of Engineering, Petroleum. And we never really, as the time that I spent there, I didn't graduate, but the time that I spent there, I never did get really deep into geology.
Where'd you stay? Did you stay on campus?
I stayed on campus for the first year, and then I stayed in the fraternity house and stuff.
Where'd you stay on campus? What building?
Oh, it was just a private home.
Just private home?
3 of us fellows from Wichita Falls rented a room.
Which fraternity did you join?
Delta, Delta.
Okay. Ever been in the military?
No, only the ROTC, as far as I got.
Yeah.
Never.
Were any of your grandfathers in the Civil War?
Could have, but I don't know.
Yeah, okay. How big was Ponca City when you first moved here?
Well, I suppose it was between 20 and 25,000, but I can't understand how they obtained the population of Ponca City. It seems that the larger it grows, the steadier the total number of people is here. But it must have been between 20 and 25,000 when I first came here.
Did Main Street look pretty much like it does today?
No, they've really improved Main Street. That's a beautiful street to drive
How did
down.
Main Street look then?
I don't know, but I can tell you a story about bringing my wife to Ponca City the first time.
Okay.
Of course, we didn't have Highway 35.
Okay.
And so the road came through Marlin. And as we drove into Marlin, there was I said, "Corinne, we're getting into some wild country over here. You gotta watch out. There's wild animals and everything in here." We hadn't gone very far to look over, and there was a camel and a big-headed, fuzzy-shouldered buffalo. There was a buffalo right there. And she really began to open her eyes. She saw these things. And we drove into Ponca City while the blanket Indians were all sitting around on. Now, that was the difference between now and then. On Main, on Grand and First, that was a corner. The Indians here in Ponca City. Call. Huh?
Call, the calls?
Call. They were sitting around on the corner with their blankets and long braids and just sitting there, hour after hour. So she was impressed.
Well, did you bring her in by the 101 ranch? You see any of those animals out there?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about through Marlin.
Yeah.
Through that country.
Did you say you saw a camel?
Oh yeah, he had a Wild West show. See.
Yeah. Okay.
Now one of the guys in this picture, did you show him that picture back here?
Not outside, not yet.
Well, that's over in the other building.
Yeah, there was one downstairs of a guy leading an elephant pulling a plow.
Oh. Well, I painted a picture. I wanted to find the place where the first well that Marlin drilled. I was a producer. He drilled several dry holes. But down south and west of town, near Indian Cemetery, the old original location of the Willy Cries for War, it's the guy who owned the land, was where he drilled his first commercial well. So I hunted around and finally found it, and then I drove back and I looked at the terrain and how the hills and valleys were, and went home and made a sketch of Marlin standing by a horse, and the owners of the ranch.
Miller Brothers.
Miller, one of the Miller brothers, George Miller, sitting on his horse, and they were looking out across the field, out across the country, and there was this old standard tubal rig going. And that's the Willy Cries floor. That was really the beginning of Conoco.
Is there anything there now?
Yeah.
Is there a monument or anything?
I think there's a monument there, but when I saw it, there wasn't anything but a little Christmas tree standing up. About all it was producing was gas distillate. Yeah, it's been a long time since I've been out there.
When was that well drilled?
That was drilled 1924, 5, 3, I don't know, in the early 20s.
Sure wasn't 1911?
1911, yeah, you bet, that's what it was. I remember 1911.
That's okay. The only reason I know is I got it.
No, I remember. I had to go to the library and look up all of this information from whatever source I could, and I found some newspapers. They had them on microfilm.
Yeah.
And I remember I spent 2 days down there going over that. 1911 is right.
Whenever these companies merged, did you always do the same work?
Yes, same department. I never changed department.
You worked with the magnetometer?
Well, no. When I came to Ponca City, I was on the gravity meter crew.
What's that?
That's a meter. It's about this high and about this big around, and they usually run them in pairs. And they have a quartz pendulum that swings back and forth. And if the gravity is strong, of course it pulls the pendulum down, the swing decreases. If there's no gravity pull area, it'll just swing for a long time. So the trick there was to measure how long it took that pendulum to reduce a certain amount. And from that we could tell relatively from this to this point whether there's a stronger pull here than there was here. Then that went on for a year or so, and then we got into Conoco got into fibers. I got into seismograph, where you shoot a charge to the ground, it creates this miniature earthquake, and the shock goes down, comes back up, and record it. In those days, the finest equipment hadn't been developed, and we were using mechanical size, which is operated by a string twisted around a mirror, and when that mirror would wiggle a little bit, we had a light shine on the mirror, it would go back to sensitized paper and make a mark, just like when you have your heart checked.
Yeah.
So that was the first one.
Back to the gravity pull. If you have a stronger gravity pull, what does that mean?
Well, it means the same thing, approximately the same thing as when you have a magnetic pull. In other words, it creates the same effect.
But yeah, that's where bedrock is closer to the surface. Okay. Do you have any questions?
No. I got another, I remember back in the Prohibition days, I was out in West Texas in a little town of Fort Stockton. You know where it is?
Yeah. I lived in Odessa.
Oh, yeah. Well, I lived in Midland for a long 5-6 years.
We didn't like you guys.
We didn't think much of anything west of the airport.
That's right. Took our name off the airport, put you on up there.
Yeah, well, Fort Stockton was one of those towns that the railroad built a hotel. It was just a little bitty bird, but they built this hotel for overnight, I guess mostly for, I don't know what they built it for. It was a nice hotel, and they served excellent meals there. And at that time, there must have been 25 or 30 scouts staying in this hotel, eating their meals there, and then going out and scouting all the wells around there. So it was a long ways back to Midland, where my headquarters were, so I used to stay on the weekends, stayed at the hotel. And another fellow there, he and I got acquainted, so he stayed too, and we just scrounged around that country. Finally one day he says, this is Prohibition. He said, let's go get some tequila. I didn't even know where we can get it. Yeah, I know where we can get it. So we got in our car and we drove out to a little place, and there was a little adobe shack there. Couldn't have been much more than a third or fourth the size of this room. And there was another car parked there, and so we thought it was another customer. So we got out of the car, and this little Mexican fella came up and asked us what we wanted. We said we want a bottle of tequila. So he said, well, follow me. And we went out to another little place about half the size of that, and there's a chicken house. And down underneath the hay, he pulled out a bottle of tequila and stuck it in his belt, closed his coat, and paid the guy $1. And as we started to walk back to the car, a Texas Ranger stepped out of this house. That was his car. He says, when he gave us the chicken, he handed us a little turkey. He says, take this too. So I gave it to this other guy, and he put it over, like this, over his bottle. And there we started walking out of this little hut, and the Texas Ranger came up to us, and he looked at the turkey and said, is that all you fellas came after? Yes, sir. And so wasn't much he could say. We got back to the car and drove back to town. We didn't know what to do with the turkey, so we tied him up out to a tree in front of the hotel. and the next day we took him back. But that was, I never will forget.
Who was the biggest bootlegger here in Ponca City?
I don't know. See, I wasn't here during that period. I came to Ponca City when I first came to Ponca City. No, it was the second time I came to Ponca City. No, it was the first time I came to Ponca City. And getting this equipment ready for the pendulum, we had to stay in town, and we were here a week or so, or 2 or 3 weeks, maybe a month. But anyway, they arranged for me to stay out here at the Quatacita. That was a... Are you familiar with what that is?
I'm sorry?
Quatacita? Well, that was a home that Marlin built for his single engineers. A beautiful place. It later became Ponca Military Academy. But
is that the one that's downtown?
no,
Up here on the hill.
up on the hill.
Okay.
It's just not even there anymore.
Oh.
Tore it down. But we stayed out there at the Quatacita Club. It was a beautiful place. It was real fine. Let's see. I keep switching from one thing to another, and I forgot what you asked.
About what the place that Marlin built for single engineers?
Yeah,
That's a Ponca City, yeah.
Quatacita Club.
Yeah.
But I delved into that off of something else.
We're talking about prohibition and bootleggers.
Yeah, that's right. So I didn't know much about it. Not in Ponca City. I can't recall if there was any particular problem about getting something if you wanted it. There is an old road that goes from, see, how do you get up there? You go north of town to Newkirk, and you turn east, a little old country road, and there's another little road that winds and winds and winds around up into Kansas. And that was called the, well, anyway, that's where they brought the liquor into Oklahoma, down that, not down the highway.
Yeah.
It had a name, but I forget what it was.
I'll ask my father-in-law. I live in Newkirk. He grew up in Newkirk.
Well, now, this road finally goes on up there and ends up,
So it end up by Schlocko or something?
it ends up in a quarry. Stone quarry. Silverstone? Is that? No, that's not it.
I'll find out.
That's why they used to bring it in.
Well, did Marlon, did he use the lakes out here to bring his booze in? Or do you even know?
The lake, to bring his booze in.
He had, this place is all surrounded by water.
Oh, yeah, I know it, but what lake are you talking about? This
Well,
lake?
yeah, the lakes that came into the boathouse.
Oh, I don't know why he would use that, it didn't go anywhere.
Well, I thought somehow he got it in here and put it through his tunnels, what I was told.
I don't know. I wouldn't think that he would have to do that. He should probably bring it in an open container. Never say anything.
Well, I think we have a good interview.
Okay, well.
We appreciate you getting out, Mr. Mount. So we appreciate you getting out, and now this'll, this'll be on down at the Oklahoma Historical Society in the archives, and so you can tell your grandkids and everything about it.
Okay. Well, this morning, I attended a meeting of the Westminster Retirement Home, Westminster Village Retirement.
Are you going to move out there?
Yes, sir.
Now, that's where the old Ponca Military Academy was, wasn't
No,
it? Oh,
it was
not?
on that road. The road goes on down past the village
Okay.
and turn on down to the cliff, where the cliff is, and that's where but everything's gone from there. But that's looking real nice, and I can't wait.
When are you going to move in?
Well, as soon as it's ready, the one that we have are going to be ready next July, I think.
Is that the first ones?
No, there's a sixplex. It's going to be ready in, say, February.
I guess you're not, are you any way related then to the people that have Mount Oil?
No, they got an S on the end of their names.
Mounts, okay, Mounts.
Let's see, I have met his wife. We were on some kind of it was a centennial thing, and Stevenson was head of it, and we were part of his group that did some things. She's Diane, her name is a nice person.
S-C-O-E,
Maiden name is Briscoe.
yes. And my married name is Vance, V-A-N-C-E.
Okay. This is November 7th,
That's
1984.
right, it is. Thank you.
And this is Joe Todd, an interview with Mrs. Audrey Vance, V-A-N-C-E. Mrs. Vance, where were you born?
I was born in Hancock County, Illinois.
May I ask your birthday?
Do I have to tell you? I'll let you guess, and then I'll tell you.
You look like you're about 21.
21, well, I always say I'm 18, 17 going on 18. But I was born August the 24th, 1898. It makes me 86 years old.
I would have never guessed that.
Well, that's what they all say.
I was honestly guess about 75.
Well, I've lived that long, but I'm not that old. That's right.
You're as old as you feel.
That's right.
Who was your father?
My father was John Robert Briscoe.
How do you spell that last name?
B-R-I-S-C-O-E.
Okay. And your mother?
Was Anna Mickle, M-I-C-K-L-E.
Were they from Illinois?
Yes. No, my father was from Palmyra, Missouri. That's where he grew up as a, so he was about 15 years old, I guess.
How long did you live in Illinois?
Till I was about 8 years old.
And where did you move?
We moved, my mother's health was, she was supposed to have throat trouble. And my father bought 400 acres of land down in Polk, P-O-L-K, County, Arkansas. We moved there in the spring, and the entire family almost died of malaria and dysentery in the summer. And we moved to western Kansas. I lived there for a year, and then we moved to Oklahoma
And what year did you move to Oklahoma?
in 1980.
1908?
Mm-hmm.
What part of Oklahoma?
Ponca City.
Ponca City. What was your reaction when you first saw Ponca City? What did the town look like?
It was a wide place in the road. It was just a little, very little country town.
Just how many streets did the town have?
Oh, it went from, I think it was, went down to South, what is now South Avenue. It was incorporated then. There were two men who, when they made the run, who had acreage. One of them was Hartman, the other was Lynch. And Hartman had an addition which was starting, well, the business district and north. And Lynch was, he made his addition was Lynchville, and it was south. I've forgotten where the break was, but I think it might have been central. And it went to South Avenue. But that part of town wasn't very well developed.
Were the buildings mainly frame, or were there brick buildings here?
Well, they were mostly frame.
Mostly frame. What were some of the businesses at that time?
Calkins had a store at the corner of First and Grand, and it's still standing there. It was a brick building.
What kind of store was it?
It was a general merchandise store.
How come your family moved to Ponca City from Kansas?
Well, I don't know that. I just came with them. I was, 8 years old, 9 years old.
How'd you travel?
Well, part of the family came by covered wagon, and part of it came by train.
Which part? How'd you travel?
By a covered wagon.
Tell me about the trip.
Well, we left Deerfield, which is about 20 miles, I guess, west of Garden City, Kansas. And we came down through Dodge City to Dodge City. And then I remember we came to Medicine Lodge, probably Anthony, and then south into, I don't remember coming through Newkirk, but we probably
Did you have horses?
We had a team of young mules and a riding horse.
Okay, so the mules pulled the wagon.
The mules pulled the wagon.
Tell me, what did you pack in the wagon when you came down?
Just the necessities to live along the highway.
Which was?
Bedding and food and clothing.
And
it was in February, so we had to have warm clothing. Well, there was my sister Fern, who was 2 years older than I, and my parents, and the youngest one of the family, which was, she was probably about a year old. Okay. And when we came, we stopped really, we stopped in Cross, which is now, of course, a part of Ponca City. And when they found a place to live, my father went back and sent my oldest sister, who had the other, it was a family of 8 children, 1 boy and 7 girls. My oldest sister, and then my brother, and then my sister. I was in the middle. I was the 4th child. And he went back and sent them down by train and brought our possessions, our furniture and the other animals down by boxcar.
I have a question. When you traveled by covered wagon like that, how did you know where you were going?
General direction. They probably had a map. There
were any roads, were there?
Oh, sure, there were good roads. Good mud roads. There weren't any finished roads, but there were roads between town. Of course, I guess they had a general idea where they were going, where they were heading, and go from one town to the other. And the towns weren't very far apart.
How long did the trip take you?
Several weeks. I don't remember just how many weeks.
Where'd you camp? How'd you sleep in the wagon?
Beds. It was a large wagon, and there were 4 or 5 of us really. The baby didn't take up much room, and it was big enough that they'd fold the beds up at night and spread them out.
You have an
on a frame inside the covered
Did
wagon.
you have an overjet on the wagon?
A what?
An overjet that laid across?
Yes, something. And,
I've heard that term used before.
well, I hadn't heard it, but that's what,
Okay. What are some of the stories on the trip that you remember?
nothing really. The weather, as I remember, was not unpleasant, especially for that time of the year. And I don't remember very much about the trip.
What about fording rivers?
We didn't ford any rivers.
You didn't?
We crossed on bridges, several bridges.
Oh, there are bridges then?
Oh, sure.
Okay. What kind of work did your father do?
My father was a cattleman, and he did farming to raise food for cattle.
Okay. Did you farm here? in Ponca
Yes,
City?
out about 9 miles, 9, 10 miles